Matrics will not have to rewrite the two leaked matric exam papers. This after the High Court of Pretoria set aside the decision of Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga. Eskom and the Special Investigation Unit recover 1.56 billion rand in overpayments made to Swedish robotics company ABB South Africa. South Africa records 8,160 new COVID-19 cases in the last 24-hour cycle, taking the total number of cases since the start of the pandemic to over 836,000. Live from the television outside broadcast headquarters of the SABC in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, this is SA Today on SABC News Channel. Thank you indeed for joining us. It's just gone 1700 hours Central African time. I'm Tabi Sositolo in the last hour of SA Today. Let's start the program right now. Now, Teachers Union SADTU says quality assurance body Umalusi must abide by the ruling of the High Court in Pretoria and declare the national certificate examinations as credible. The court set aside the decision by Basic Education Minister for Matrics to rewrite two leaked exam papers. SADTU, along with Afriforum and a group of independent matric pupils, brought an urgent application to stop the rewrite.
We welcome the judgment, and we hope that the department will also take this judgment in good faith in order to ensure that the learners who are not responsible for the leak are not being punished, and therefore their papers will be marked accordingly in terms of the order of the court. So we welcome this particular decision, but also it's a lesson for Umalusi that they don't have to make irrational decisions. They don't have to make decisions on the basis of fear. They must always rely on logic, rely on reasonability, but also rely on hard evidence that they are supposed to be doing before they make an intimidating and threatening statement that they would not be releasing the results, because it is not about who is winning and who is losing here. It's about the interest of our learners and our country.
About that, what was their standpoint in this? We understand that they said the integrity, or they want to protect the integrity of both papers, the maths paper 2 and the physical science paper 2, and you are saying that they jumped the gun. What do you mean? Can you just explain it for us, please?
Yes, because when they went to the minister and said to the minister that we will not release or certify the outcome, you don't do that. You wait for evidence. You wait to say, yes, indeed, we have done everything we can. So one, they were supposed to investigate, and they know that they can embark on forensic marking or investigative marking, and they can isolate those who have had an access to the question paper. It's not difficult. You can be able to do that, because these learners are coming from grade 11. These learners have written paper 1, and you can go back and check what is their performance in paper 1 and why is that the performance in paper 2 has all of a sudden jumped from where the paper 1 is not, or where were they in 2019 in terms of grade 11. And those things are there. They are the tools that they're supposed to use. But really, to put a gun on the head of the minister and say we are not going to release, they themselves were undermining the credibility of the examination, because they wanted to use fear to be the measurement of credibility. Credibility is measured in terms of quantifiable evidence that you are going to be put on the table and say we have 300 learners or 500 learners out of 390,000 learners. Therefore, these of the 380,000 are valid and these one are not valid. You don't generalize. And that to us was very problematic.
That was SADTU, who we spoke to a short while ago. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to speak to SABC News, a specialist education reporter, Mahlako Komane, with regards to the, reaction to this. In fact, I'm told that she's ready. She's joining us, specialist reporter in education. Mahlako Komane, are you there? Oh, she's not there yet. But anyway, let me just read an excerpt once again from the judgment made earlier today. Judge there saying, I therefore conclude that the decision to have the maths paper 2 and physics science paper 2 papers of the National Senior Certificates Examination rewritten was irregular and unlawful and should be reviewed and set aside. I further conclude that The learners have a right to have their exam papers marked in terms of Regulation 45, which provide for such right irrespective of whatever proposal or certifications made by Umalusi now or in the future. In the exercise of my direction, said the judge, I find no cogent reason to depart from the general principle that costs should follow the event. This should include the costs of amicus curiae, as well as who made useful contributions to the debate of the matters. The debate of the matters, Mahlako, is what came out in court, and as we stand, matriculants will not have to rewrite that paper. Mahlako Komane joins us now. Your reaction, ma'am?
Yes, good afternoon indeed to you, Thabiso, and the listeners at home. Thabiso, you know, we must caution. I've just, made some calls and tried to understand what does this actually mean. Now you'll understand that there is also an issue of the credibility of the exam, the way exams are set up in South Africa, such that they must be accredited, which in our case is done by Umalusi as the quality assurance body. Now, with them having indicated that the credibility, particularly with those particular papers, the physical science as well as the mathematics, the pure maths, if you want to call it that, paper has been damaged irrevocably. It was not papers that they could then certify and say they are happy with how the exams took place, considering that there is obviously the leakages that nobody's denying that this has happened. Now, what this could possibly mean is that for the 300,000 plus students who take these subjects may have their future hanging in the balance, pending, I think, investigations as well as the marking, because it's my understanding when I was speaking to educational authorities is that it would seem from what they understand of the judgment is that they will then have to go and mark the papers, which we know was going to run into February, because this year, obviously, exams having started later. And it is then after that, with Umalusi probably deciding not to certify these exams, that they would probably have to find themselves back in court. So I think it's the way perhaps the judgment was set out, or it was handed down, that would seem to leave a little bit more questions than answers in terms of what is the future of those grade 12 learners that take these particular subjects if Umalusi refuses to certify these exams as being fair and credible, and thus enabling the department, if you want to call it, to be able to release that particular certificate.
Speak to us about that. Umalusi, you mentioned the credibility of the exam. If they do not ratify it, and according to the judgment, which says that the respondent 1 and 2, being the Minister of Basic Education, Umalusi Council for Quality, for quality assurance in general, and further education and training, that of course being the third respondent, the judgment says both respondents 1 and 2 must go back, mark the papers of those matriculants who are not found to have cheated in these exams. Surely that in itself, that paragraph would say Umalusi has no, well, unless they appeal this judgment, they've got no way besides having to rectify this.
Thabiso, you'd also have to remember and appreciate that what has happened right now is what we understand is that the department has been working on preliminary investigations. Now, to be able to go and see how far and how wide this question paper, or these two question papers had then leaked, becomes a problem. How long are these investigations going to take? We know that in South Africa, just to get a court date, just to get a matter on the road, just to get the Hawks to start working on a particular case can take years. If you're lucky, it's months. What does that then mean in the interim? How are we then going to establish how many students have cheated, which ones have cheated, which ones have not cheated? And also the distribution of this question paper is also we find ourselves in a very peculiar situation because of the technological space that we live in, that this paper was distributed over social media. And also it becomes a question, how do you then prove who had access to that paper before writing paper. How long did they have access? I could have possibly received the paper. I may have said that, well, I only saw it 5 minutes into it. But how do we then prove that? That this becomes a question that needs to be answered in terms of investigations. Those investigations need to be thorough to ensure that students that are not guilty are not hard done by. I suppose the easier thing to have done, which is I suppose what the department had done, was to say let everybody rewrite, because we all know this paper has leaked. And I think also perhaps an indication from them by just making that announcement, because when we went, the press conference that Minister Mcheka had said that they were going to look at how widespread this was. Should they find that it's quite bad, a rewrite would have to be called, and I think this was what has happened in this particular case. So in terms of the judgment saying that they must take out the students that have cheated, it becomes very difficult. How long are these investigations going to take? Are institutions of higher learning going to be able to accept these students? And also mathematics is, pure maths. It's a compulsory subject in South Africa for those that have chosen pure maths over maths literacy. It may not affect the children that have taken maths literacy, but for those children that wish to pursue careers, higher education careers, it becomes quite challenging. How long with this investigation? Do we have the forensic capabilities as a country and resources to be able to do this type of investigation?
Mahlako, I guess this also paints a picture of an education department that needs to tighten up on every level, whether it's paper distribution, whether it's delivering material on time, year in and year out. We spoke to SADTU earlier, and I asked them the very same question. It happens every year that a paper is leaked. When will it stop, and how do we stop it so that this does not happen? Because this would have been the first time ever in the history of South African education that a paper exams would have to be rewritten.
The issue of question papers, initially, as far as my memory takes me back, it used to be in certain it used to be in certain provinces, but also you'd remember we didn't have things like WhatsApp, we didn't have Facebook. When you trace it back to the 90s, when papers would leak here and there, it would not be that difficult to be able to trace things down, to be able to zone in particular areas. But the minute you start adding split-second technology, things change, the dynamics automatically change. But you are quite correct in the issue of security, of the department having to be accountable for the security of the question papers as well as the exam, because this does impact a lot of lives. It impacts, it also impacts into the space of higher education that should, for example, let's pretend this was a language paper that had been leaked, meaning an entire class would not be able to know whether they are able to go to university or not. I mean, there are big implications. But when we did pose the question in terms of the security of this, we were told that this would not necessarily be discussed, if you wanna call it that. I think another thing that was done, it would seem, is that there were backup papers that were put in place, and I mean, you would hear. I have not verified this, but you would hear that some of these papers were also, there were issues there with those particular papers. So when we asked the minister, and I said, is the cancer not in the department, in the sense that these leaks are happening from you? I, as a parent at home, don't have a question paper. Teachers generally, we assume, don't have question papers. So between what she then explained is between the department and as well as the printers, that would sometimes be where the problem would take place. They'd also added those security measures to ensure that papers would be delivered as and when they're needed, as opposed to having papers sleep over at night. But it would seem that papers are not necessarily leaking at schools, if you want to call it that, but somewhere within the value chain of getting papers printed and delivering them to the schools, they seem to be a problem.
Cut out the middleman, print the paper at the department head offices, drive them to the school. That's what I would do. But anyway, I'm not.
And also,
Yes, Mahlako.
And also, Thabiso, just quickly before you go, I mean, we had seen certain companies coming up and saying that is this perhaps not the time to move to a digital examination, because you'd understand
Yes.
that once you start adding printers, we have those the physical question papers that must happen. Could we not move towards the standards that you see in your North America as well as your Europe, where these things, your SATs could be written possibly online, but the education system, and I think the tapestry that, well, in terms of the country, in
Yes.
terms of technology as well as the availability of data, the access for learners across the country becomes very difficult. Yes, you may be able to, in terms of technology, service a certain segment of society, certain provinces that are able to cope with getting data and so forth. But I think perhaps we need to start looking at how we conduct examinations as a country, as well as coming up to speed in terms of technological advancements to be able to ensure that these papers don't have to leak.
Yeah, Mahlako Komane, SABC Specialist Reporter on Education. Thank you very much indeed for your insights. Always valuable insights coming from you. Thank you very much, ma'am.